Hey everybody, welcome back to Two Dudes Talking Motorcycles. My name is Mitch.
And my name is Gleb.
And you can be sure to follow our show on Instagram at tdtmotorcycles. Also on YouTube at tdtmotorcycles podcast.
Nope.
Just
at TDT Motorcycles.
At TDT Motorcycles. As well as if you want to shoot us any pictures, questions, things like that, we have our email at tdtmotorcycles@gmail.com.
You can also follow me personally on Instagram at Gleb Lapham.
And I'm just on Instagram at Meets to the Beach.
And today we have another history episode for you guys today. And we're sort of a history. We're talking about motorcycles in war and military applications since, I don't remember how we came up with the idea for this topic, but
I think it just came to me when I was like preparing for you to come over to record a show, and that magnet that I got in the UK of that dispatch rider.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
sweet.
And you're going to learn like what a dispatch rider is today too.
Perfect. Well, I'm excited too because Mitch is mainly running the show on this because my life has been all over the place for the last couple of weeks.
It's been a minute, huh?
Yeah. And this is our last show of the year.
It is.
So
yeah.
Thank you. That's another year.
Goodbye,
it's
2024, right?
Like 2 years, over 2 years now that we've been doing this podcast. So
yeah.
Thank you all for sticking around with us for yet another year. After this episode, I think we're going to take a break, probably skip an episode, and then come back in the middle of January after
something.
Give ourselves a little break after the holidays and during the holidays.
Yep.
But we all hope you had a wonderful Christmas and a wonderful 2024 year.
Hope you got to ride a lot.
Yeah, hopefully you did. If you have any like riding highlights or stories you want to share with us, send us an email or shoot us a DM on Instagram about your favorite ride or experience that you had with your motorcycle this year. We'd love to hear from you guys.
Yep.
What was your favorite experience this year?
Probably the California trip.
I agree with that. Yeah, that's going to be my top one.
Yeah.
Because that was a pretty amazing trip, and that was definitely a motorcycling highlight of the year for us.
Yeah, it was a bucket list item.
Oh, 100%. Riding up that coast, and you can go back to listen to our full episode with Emerson that we had on this, and yeah, I think all of us probably are in agreement that was definitely a fantastic highlight.
Yeah, that was probably that was not the only thing I did this year. Like outside of like life and work, because like that's what I set time for myself to do or with friends, So it's like
that's kind of true. Well, yeah, we went to San Francisco that one time too.
Oh, we did do that.
Yeah, not on our motorcycles. We just flew there. But
we were back on our motorcycles too,
and we were back there on our motorcycles too. Yeah, which was fun. That was definitely a very big highlight. I definitely learned a lot about my bike on that trip and about my own like self, I guess, preferences.
Same.
What I'm gonna do better or worse, or what I'm gonna do better next time.
Yeah. What you would do again, what you wouldn't do.
Yeah, what I would do again, what I wouldn't do, what I would bring, what I would want to buy for my bike to make future trips, especially ones that are that long, easier or a little bit more convenient for some things. But yeah, that was definitely a highlight.
Yeah, no, that was a good one. So.
And I think last year we kind of talked about touched on goals for next year.
Yeah.
You said you wanted to ride more.
Yes.
I'm keeping it kind of the same, but I do want to learn to ride off-road better. Better skills there. Maybe I'll finally learn how to do a power slide. I don't know if I'm brave enough to attempt that. I said I was going to do a track day this year, but I never got around to it. So maybe that's another
next year
thing I'm going to try to do next year. So we'll see. And hopefully we get to ride more bikes.
We
said we were going to ride a Harley this year and we never did.
We still didn't
so we still need to do that.
So we failed on that one.
We did fail on that one.
Yeah.
So next year we'll try.
No, we will. So, but
let's jump into our main topic.
Let's do it, shall we?
Motorcycles in war.
Yeah. So, this, I guess, just to kind of give everybody just like an idea of how I went about this episode is I'm going to touch on like a few like interesting points, key facts from there. But honestly, like what I found to be surprising about this was there's a lot of war history with motorcycles.
Oh, I believe it. I mean, they seem to be like it's a machine.
Yeah.
And any machine, car manufacturers, motorcycle manufacturer, like any like manufacturer in the last 100 years,
Yeah.
has been involved in some kind of like war manufacturing.
Yeah.
Probably.
Yep. So
it makes sense.
It does. And where it all kind of really started on was that bicycles actually had been used in the military throughout Europe and the world for quite some time now, at this point. They're a cheap, affordable way to get around fast, and they even had like bicycle battalions. Like there was this.
That I did not know.
Yeah, no, so there was like whole units that were bicycled. But then as World War I started, they quickly found out that animals that were horses, oxen, stuff like that.
When I was doing some of the much lighter research than you for this episode.
Yeah.
One of the things I did read was about how horses were used as in war up until pretty much World War One, which was just over 100 years ago, which is not that long.
And when needed, they're still used on wagons and carriages and stuff, like for the losing side,
And but the biggest thing is, horses are animals. They're affected by
stress,
injury. Weather, the gas in World War I, all of those different things. So it makes sense that they would look for an alternative method of still being able to kind of get around quicker than like an armored car of the day.
That was one of the interesting things that kind of laid the groundwork for having it become motorized.
Yeah.
We had artillery barrages, there's chemical weapons, which animals are affected by. And so there's we've already started using some of these new fancy machines. And now with this type of warfare, we have to move to to motors. And that's when you start to see like motorcycle or like motorized bicycles starting to come into play. They still had pedals that you could still move along yourself.
Yeah.
With from there, I forget the name of it, but even say Indian motorcycles, they made one that was super popular.
Like looking back at all the history episodes we've done, like so far in this podcast, it seems like almost every motorcycle manufacturer started out with just slapping an engine on a bicycle, onto a bicycle, and kind of going up from there. It was the same case with Triumph. It was the same case with Ducati. It was the same case with, I don't know if you've done BMW, but I'm pretty sure it was somewhere in there too. And I'm pretty sure if we do a deep dive into like any of the Japanese manufacturers, they also probably started off maybe slapping an engine into a bicycle. Yeah. I don't know 100% because I haven't looked into that yet, but it seems to be a common trend among motorcycle companies.
Yeah. So, so that's basically how it started. We had bicycles, and then there was a need for a motor, and they strapped a motor to a bicycle, and that kind of just started the push of motorcycles into warfare.
Yeah.
And what we see is that the bikes are mostly used for like dispatch riders, and what that is a messenger on a motorcycle.
Yeah, I noticed that too when I was doing some research. For this.
Yep, and so they, but they saw how quickly these bikes could get around and deploy people.
Yeah.
And so like in World War I, we saw the weird, marriage of like motorcycles in combat, like used for combat roles.
Yeah.
So like with the one guy I decided to note on this one, there was a British naval aviation commander, Charles Sampson. He actually started using motorized vehicles like cars and trucks to deploy troops and pick up, pilots who are down in enemy territory. And eventually he started to armor up these vehicles. These were like Rolls Royce and Mercedes.
Yeah. Okay.
In World War I, that he started to armor up an arm. And this became like a force known as the British Armored Car Force, the Car Force, which I thought was pretty funny. And inside this force, there were 5 squadrons with motorcycle sidecars, and some of them had mounted machine guns on them. It was
a very classic, when we started talking about this topic, that was probably like the first image that popped into my head was, a motorcycle with a sidecar on. It actually reminded me of
with a machine gun,
like one of the old Call of Duty, like the OG Call of Duty games. I think it was either Call of Duty 1 or 2. or I think the very first Call of Duty game had like an expansion for it, but I can't remember what it was called. But you're like in the Battle of the Bulge, and there's like an escape mission towards the end where you like ride out on a motorcycle. And you're sitting in a sidecar with your the 30 cal machine gun, just like firing away, and that's like the first
section.
Yep.
That's awesome.
That's the first image that popped into my head.
Yeah. So just we started seeing this, and it's just a really weird concept.
Yeah.
You know? But I think I guess it was like kind of the logical step at this point in time, because we started with horses and stuff and guns and cannons. We started using mounted warfare, like with rifles and stuff.
Yeah.
So it's like, oh well, a motorcycle, that just must be a machine
like an
horse. So we're just gonna ride these things in the battle. Turns out that's not quite how motorcycles work.
Yeah, that's true.
It was just very bizarre time. But while there was some instances of motorcycles like actually in combat, they were mostly using them to like transport the machine guns, get them deployed quickly, and they would leave, that kind of thing.
That makes a lot of sense.
So they had these ideas, but they kind of started to see reality of what these things could do. And these old, basically prototype bikes, they're not really going to be good for off-road. Now imagine riding this across like World War I.
One of the ones I was reading about, and I think you have some more info on it later, was the Harley Davidson Model J, is that it didn't even have like rear suspension.
No. No front brake.
No front brake. It used an oil lamp for a headlight, and it's just like so rudimentary.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine riding something without a rear suspension, especially like over rough terrain, which I'm assuming not a lot of roads were paved back then. Especially in the countryside where the war primarily took place.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine trying to ride that on anything but the smoothest surface without a rear suspension. Those tires better have been thick.
Oh, they had to have been. Yeah. So it's just crazy.
Yeah.
But speaking of that, the Harley Davidson Model J, this is one of the models I decided to list out for this episode.
Yeah.
When America entered World War I, the U.S. Army purchased roughly 20,000 olive green Harley Davidson motorcycles.
That's insane.
And so this was the Model J. It came outfitted with with a sidecar, shields, machine guns. Just typical American stuff.
Just the usual stuff.
Yeah,
they still make them that way.
Yeah, exactly. So, this was a 61 cubic inch V-twin motor, so a 2.75 gallon gas tank, 3-speed transmission. So this is what America brought to the table, I guess.
Some good old rugged American ingenuity.
Yep. But because of the color that this had, placing it out, that the Model J basically locked in that color for pretty much every single Harley until the 30s.
I believe it, because I feel like I've seen a lot of those.
The green motorcycles.
Not around in real life.
Yeah.
But like in any kind of movie, TV, Captain America had one in the Winter Soldier. And the first Avenger in the first Captain America movie.
Yep.
Like I remember he was riding that, and I'm pretty sure like any war movie. I feel like that color, that green is just like associated with like the World War II,
or just military
era color. But like any World War II movie you watch, like Saving Private Ryan, Fury, Band of Brothers. Like any of those, any vehicle you see
it's gonna be
around it is going to be that olive green with the white star on it. And that makes sense.
Yeah. So that was, Harley Davidson in World War I. Very interesting. One thing I forgot to put it down, I think, but one thing I read on there was that it was estimated that Indian provided about 40,000 units.
That is
during
crazy.
The war. And so, they had dedicated pretty much all of their factory to the war effort.
Damn.
Which actually turned out to be how Harley kind of gained popularity. It's because Indians' manufacturing and availability, like basically kind of like it hurt their presence in the civilian market.
Oh, okay.
So I thought that was kind of an interesting.
That's kind of interesting. That it's like woven in there.
Yeah. So Indian had about 40,000 units. Harley, they had about 20,000, which was about half of their production.
Yeah.
So they didn't quite go all in as Indian, but it seemed to pay off for them.
I mean, yeah,
being able to produce bikes quicker than Indian.
And what's cool is both those companies are still around.
Yeah, and they're still around,
still making bikes.
Yep. Sorry, we're gonna
no, go ahead.
So that was what we had on the American side. But across the pond with a brand, I didn't even realize I was wearing the same hat and jacket, same brand, but Triumph, our favorite.
Our favorite brand. And it's the Model H, which I remember we covered in our History of Triumph episode, was basically their war bike. I mean, it wasn't really a war bike, but it was a bike known for being pretty reliable and easy to fix, but also pretty rugged. So it was able to handle kind of that rough terrain that you'll probably see on the battlefield.
And what was cool about this bike, I don't know if we found this out during that Triumph history episode, but the Triumph Model H was known as the Trusty Triumph.
Okay.
This was also this bike also.
We did mention that.
Yeah.
I think I remember.
But this was also the first bike or first motorcycle to come without pedals.
Really? Okay.
So it was the first what we imagine as a motorcycle. This was kind of the first one to do it. But yeah, it was called the Trusty Triumph because it was reliable. It could handle the terrain really well. It's really just kind of stuck a good name out there for Triumph in the beginning. So
and basically set them off. Yeah. But Triumph also did start with bicycles.
They did.
Even without engines.
Yeah, they
remember
it was
like a
bicycles.
Straight up bicycle manufacturer. Yeah. The Triumph Model H did have whopping 4 horsepower.
Pretty speedy.
Very speedy, out of a 453cc engine. And a 3-speed gearbox.
And it was a hand operated
that would throw me off so much if I had to try that. I think Revzilla actually just had a video. I didn't watch it, but saw their post about it on their, I forgot what their series is called. I think it's the Daily Rider or whatever, where one of their hosts just kind of rides a bike through LA.
Yeah.
And there was I think it was an old World War II era Harley, but it did have a hand shift.
Suicide shifter.
Yeah. Well, no, it was up at the top. It was near the gas tank.
Oh.
So it wasn't
interesting.
on the side. It was up in the top. And I'll have to go back and watch that because I feel that'd be interesting how I would love to ride a really old bike that just to see how good we have it now and how much easier it probably is.
Right.
I picture it would be something we drive cars every single day. Imagine one of us hopping into a Ford Model T.
Right.
I would have no idea how to even make that thing go unless someone actually showed it to me.
Right.
Or looked it up online. But any other car nowadays, you can hop in, you can figure it out.
Yeah.
You start it up, you put it in drive or first gear, and you go.
Yeah. It's we've established how the best way this works.
Yeah,
right?
pretty much.
Yeah.
So it's really cool seeing how not just the war bikes, but in bikes in general, just evolve over time and kind of how tech just kind of this is the better way to do it, so we're going to do it.
Yep.
We all have foot controls on the left side. Brake on the left or brake on the right.
Yeah, brakes
clutch
on the
left.
Yep.
Throttle, twisty throttle, all that stuff.
No, exactly. Yeah. So that's the story with the Model H. So, and as I said at the beginning, there's actually a lot of history for motorcycle warfare stuff. We've only mentioned 2 brands so far. And I didn't really want to make this a super duper long episode.
Yeah.
Or really do all the research on all these brands.
There's a lot of brands, and I feel it would have just taken up a lot of time to mention a whole lot of them. Yeah. But I do see you have a list.
For the Allies in World War I, motorcycle manufacturers partaking were Royal Enfield, Indian, Excelsior, Douglas, Kleino, the Cleveland Motorcycle Manufacturing Co., Henderson Ford, Zenith Motorcycles, Felon and More, and Sunbeam.
I have heard of only 3 of those
two
brands.
Two or three of those brands.
Yeah. Two of those brands.
And I think I forgot to put Norton in there too. I think Norton was around then.
Okay.
They're definitely in World War II, but yeah. So, so again, we just have to recognize those brands.
Yeah.
Again, I didn't look at the German.
I'm sure
side.
Germany had BMW involved.
Sure. Yeah.
So that just makes sense.
Right. But to kind of look back in the same time period, but not a part of World War I, but like other conflicts at the same time. This one was actually pretty funny. It's a good marketing strategy that Indian and Harley decided to kind of advertise on. So in 1913, General John Blackjack Pershing, he was ordered to chase after Pancho Villa, the Mexican revolutionist.
Mm-hmm.
He had attacked a town in New Mexico, and so some Americans and some soldiers were killed from that. And so this general was sent after him, and in his unit or what his forces, he had motorcycles, Harley Davidson motorcycles, mounted with machine guns, and so. For Harley and Indian, because the Pancho Villa, I think he had an Indian.
Yeah.
So there's this whole advertising thing about how American motorcyclists stormed into battle on their Harleys, machine guns ablazing, chasing down Mexican revolutionists. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. While the motorcycles were used and they did see like some slight combat, mounted horse warfare in this region was still preferred. It was faster, easier to manage, and you can get across from there. So, so even outside World War I, motorcycles are being used on lesser operations.
Yeah.
And this general must have had some pull because he also had planes at his disposal. And this incident or this operation marked the first time motorcycles and airplanes worked together.
Bro was basically given like a blank check and said like, hey, catch this guy. Here's whatever you need.
Yeah.
And the dude's like, motorcycles.
Yeah.
And airplanes. Hear me out.
Yes.
Like, say less, fam. Let's go.
Yeah. How they work together, I don't know. No idea. See that, but yeah. So
they had radios back then, right?
I don't think
1918, 1913?
I don't think so.
They definitely not like handheld or...
No.
Okay, yeah. I wouldn't even know. I can't even imagine how you like coordinate something.
Well,
like that.
And that's actually why the dispatch riders were so invaluable.
That makes sense.
It's probably the fastest way back then to get a rider or to get a message to and from.
That makes a lot of sense.
So, but yeah, so we just see like this really odd point in history where they thought they were going to use motorcycles in direct combat as like combat equipment, but
it didn't quite pan out.
And especially as technology continued to climb. And this is where we start to move on into World War II.
Okay.
But to build that though, build my point about this weird time with motorcycles being used. I was reading one article, or it wasn't even an article. It was like just like a point of fact through something. Yeah. Saying that roughly a third of the U.S. Army's cavalry were riding Harley motorcycles at the point of the 1930s.
Wow.
So they were using them. They're pieces of equipment.
Yeah.
But that they never really saw the full combat value.
That makes sense.
Or direct combat.
I mean, it kind of makes sense, especially with like four-wheeled vehicles and cars. Mm-hmm. You can add a lot more protection. You can add a lot more armor to it. More people. They can carry more people. I mean, in World War II, we saw plenty of like troop carriers and half tracks and like armored trucks. And I mean, if you think about it, it's definitely, I mean, they're not going to be as quick, but if you're transporting mass amounts of people or equipment and you want to protect it or give it at least a bit more protection, then it kind of makes sense that motorcycles were kind of left more towards that like reconnaissance and communications role versus actively being involved in warfare.
Yeah, and that's pretty much exactly what happened by the time World War II came around. For the Americans, I forget like what they had in Europe and other allies, but the Jeep proved to be way more useful than a motorcycle. Also, for the military use.
One of my favorite fun facts about Jeep is that the original Jeep, the GP, the JP, was built by Ford.
Oh,
yeah.
I didn't know.
Yeah, it was built originally by Ford, and Ford is actually the ones that designed the iconic Jeep
the
grill. That's the 2 headlights with the like the 8 or 6 whatever slots.
Yeah,
slotted grill. That was originally all designed by Ford.
interesting.
And then I don't remember how the design went over to Chrysler, or I think it was Chrysler at the time.
GM, wasn't it?
No, GM is Chevy.
Oh yeah, no, you're right. Yeah.
I don't know how it ended up in like Chrysler's hands, or
wasn't it a patent dispute or something?
I don't remember. I didn't actually look into the history, but it ended up in Chrysler hands somehow, and then they started making like Jeeps with that iconic look. But I also don't know if Ford had like a patent on it or anything like that, because it was specifically built for the military.
Yeah.
Like it wasn't built to be sold as like a civilian vehicle. It wasn't built to be like mass produced for
the military. Was like,
civilian.
We need a vehicle to do this and do it right.
And I think it kind of makes sense that it would be Ford that built them, because I mean, they're the ones that started the whole like assembly line process. Henry Ford came up with it and had the whole, cars for the masses idea of, producing stuff on an assembly line. So, I mean, since they were the first two, I think by the time the 1940s came around, it makes sense that they probably have one of the largest manufacturer capacities out of any other car company.
Yeah.
So
no, for sure.
It makes sense that Ford would get that bid, but it's just a fun fact about Jeep.
Yeah. No, I didn't know that. So yeah, it was cool. But, so the Jeep started to replace the motorcycle in all these like aspects. It was a better machine gun mounting device. You can move more people, more supplies at once. It's more stable, more reliable.
Yeah.
So the motorcycle's effectiveness started to kind of roll back. It wasn't being used quite as much. So they're more like, motorcycles got pushed to the more like support and just daily use type roles. Just another vehicle.
Yeah.
But they still proved very quickly, like, as the war started kicking off, as the dispatch riders. And that's pretty much what bikes were used for. They were just quick messaging devices.
I mean, it's a perfect, I feel like it'd be not the perfect, the radio and stuff would definitely be a better tool for that, but it makes sense. They're quick, nimble, and it's a much smaller footprint as well. So it makes sense that they would use them for those kind of purposes. And while we're on the topic of World War II, let me go over some of the bikes that I found that the Soviets used.
We're going to hop over to Soviet, and then you just grab Soviet stuff.
Yeah,
right?
just the Soviet stuff. Yeah. But I know from doing the research on this that the Germans also used plenty of motorcycles in their war, primarily with a small little company called BMW, who not only produced motorcycles for the war effort, but also airplane engines and a lot of other stuff. Lots of interesting history over on BMW's side.
Yeah, for sure.
They and then in Italy you have Ducati that also manufactured motorcycles. They kind of went into motorcycles a little bit after the war, but they did produce radios and communications equipment for the Axis forces back in the day as well. I
actually found that Moto Guzzi actually has some interesting little bikes that they made for the Italian military.
Okay.
Yeah.
That I did not know. But
they have this weird like little, it looks like the front of a motorcycle, but I forget what they're called. You see them all over like in Taiwan and stuff, where I have like a little like wagon in the back.
Tuk-tuk?
Yeah.
Tuk-tuk. There's also one, I don't remember what it was called. I want to say it was built by BMW, but I'm not going to like make that as fact because I'm not sure if it's actually true. But you've probably seen it in like movies and stuff. Do you remember like the Germans had this like half-track motorcycle?
I have a note in there.
You have a note? Okay, awesome. I'm glad you have that because that thing cracks me up and I have no idea how you would drive that.
Yeah.
I feel like it would drive more like a car than anything.
Yeah, so that one was interesting. It's actually, we see it in the movie Saving Private Ryan near the end.
Okay, yeah.
There's that little like, it's a half-track motorcycle. If you don't know what a half-track is, it's half tank, half truck.
Well, tracks.
Yeah. So it's got like the tank tracks in the back and then
wheels in the front.
But this was a motorcycle, so it had like a handlebar and one wheel up front.
It's so wild.
It's bizarre looking. They had these really fat tracks.
Yeah.
So that was called, and I'm probably going to butcher this, I believe it's called the Kettenkraft.
The Kettenkraft.
Kettenkraft? I don't. I'm sorry. I don't know. I forget how to pronounce it. But yeah. So it was initially intended for German airborne troops, so that they could deploy with it and get around quickly.
Mm-hmm.
But it's still a big, heavy machine.
Oh yeah, it's massive.
Yeah.
There's no way that thing rides anywhere as fast or as nimble as like a bike.
Yeah. Even though it can cover like terrain and stuff, that was like its whole idea, but it mostly found itself being used as basically like a small tractor. It could get around outposts and stuff in there, but they did use it to actually build like lines to lay cables and stuff like that.
Okay.
And so
it
saw its use.
If I ever had a chance to try and ride one of those, I would 100% love
100%, yeah.
Because I can't. I'm just curious to see how it would look and feel to be on that thing.
No, exactly.
But speaking of BMW, so the funny thing is about them is that like a lot of companies used BMW and German designs to manufacture their own bikes.
Yeah.
So Harley Davidson, in fact, I don't know if they somehow acquired like a BMW engine, and they basically decided to kind of look at it, how it was engineered, and use some of the stuff they found in their own motorcycle designs. And the Soviets just straight up copied designs.
They just took the Boxer.
So one of the biggest, Russian, so Ural motorcycles, Urals, they are like one of the few manufacturers that exclusively manufacture bikes with a sidecar to this day.
Yeah.
And they have 2-wheel drive, which cracks me up. But they used to build their stuff in Russia, but ever since Russia invaded Ukraine, they moved their production to Kazakhstan. That way they can keep selling it on the world market. So their entire company moved to Kazakhstan ever since the Russian invasion. And but yeah, that bike uses a Boxer engine, which the Soviets reverse engineered from the BMW Boxer engine that they got from the Germans. But there's 3 bikes that I have listed here for Soviets, and a lot of them were based on German motorcycles. There is, however, while these are ones that were built in the Soviet Union, there's also one manufacturer that gave a lot of motorcycles to the Soviet Union through their Lend-Lease program, and that was Harley Davidson. So it was, I think, close to like 10,000 motorcycles that Harley Davidson basically, or through the U.S. government, the U.S. government like leased to the Soviets a bunch of Harley Davidson bikes, basically. Right. The other cool, the Lend-Lease program, for those of you that aren't familiar, it's basically like a program that the U.S. government had for the Soviet Union. They're using it with Ukraine now too. Is that they basically give weapons and you sort of pay it back if you can, kind of deal.
Yeah.
But there's actually, in my hometown in Russia, there's like a history museum, and in that museum there is a Winchester repeater like on display, and it was given to the Soviet military through Lend-Lease. That was from World War One. And then there was another one that was a like a Henry Martinez, like a British rifle.
Yeah.
That was also given to them through Lend-Lease. So there's a lot of like
really
a few
cool
American weapons like in that museum, which I thought was kind of neat.
No, that's actually really cool. Yeah. Dang.
Nice. But anyways, so there's 3 motorcycles that I highlighted. The first was the L300, and that was the first Soviet motorcycle that was ever produced. So it had a sidecar. It looked very rudimentary. The design was based on the German DKW 300 Lux. It was a single-cylinder 293cc engine with a whopping 6 horsepower and a 3-speed gearbox. And it was primarily used for communication and reconnaissance roles. The second one is the PMZ A750, which was also developed for the Soviet military, but also incorporated designs from BMW. And it had a 2-cylinder 747cc engine and could reach speeds of them to 90 kilometers an hour. It was a pretty heavy bike because it had a sidecar on it, and it was already kind of just very heavy bits and pieces.
Yeah.
Also used as communication by the Soviet military, as well as the Soviet postal service in the civilian world. The funny bit was that due to its starter, it had a terrible starter, or motor just kind of sucked on it to start up, and it was given the nickname "Попробуй меня завести," which translates to "try to start me." But the acronyms in Russian, the acronyms line up together.
Try to start me.
Yeah. And then the final bike that I highlighted was the M72. And this bike was built exclusively for the Soviet military right before World War II. The design was, once again, heavily borrowed from a German BMW, I think it was the R71 motorcycle. And there was over 9,000 of these motorcycles produced during the war. And they had anything like machine guns mounted on them. In fact, the website that I got this information from, I'll show you this.
While you're getting that up, I remember I did read a part on the M72 and kind of how it was derived from the German motorcycle.
Mm-hmm.
But Russia was actually really on board with having like warfare, like a better warfare bike. In there, because they had like some conflict with Finland, and their motorcycles during that conflict like failed miserably.
Yeah, they did not work, and basically after that, I think it was the Winter War is the official name for it. They basically decided like, oh hey, we kind of need something that works better in this, and that's what kind of got them to make more and more, or to push heavily into motorcycles. I don't know why it's not let me click the link.
Yeah, it's not like a hyperlink. It's weird.
But while we're doing that, we should probably sneak in a word from our sponsors, Shogun Motorcycle Adventures. This episode is brought to you by Shogun Motorbike Adventures. Ride, explore, and immerse in the best of Japan with a great selection of bikes, accommodation, expert guides, and a support vehicle, cultural immersion, and more. Ride from Tokyo to Mount Fuji and beyond, discovering hidden gems along the way. Use promo code 2dudes15 at shogunmotorbikeadventures.com to save 15% off your tour. Don't miss out. Book your spot on the tour today. That's shogunmotorbikeadventures.com. Thank you guys so much for sponsoring this episode. Now back to our main topic. And so I was able to find that picture.
Oh yeah.
So this M71 bike, they basically, or M72 bike motorcycles, they basically just like equipped it in so many different ways. And I have a picture pulled up right here. This has got a straight up mortar launcher just mounted on the back of it, and like with a sidecar onto the sidecar, which just looks comical. There's one with like armor on it. Yeah, it's just so many different.
It's insane.
So many different like configurations, which I just found comical. But this bike, the interesting thing about it is basically the precursor to Euro motorcycles, which are still around today.
Yeah.
And so that kind of leads into it. That's all I got on the Soviet military bikes, but I really wanted to show you that.
It is interesting because it's like, World War I, you see all these other nations just like, hey, like we tried this, and
the Soviets were just like, fuck it, let's go ham. Let's put a mortar on the back of this bike.
Didn't work the first time, we'll make it work this time.
Which actually feels like very on par for the Soviets, because are you familiar with the Katyusha?
Mm-mm.
So Katyusha was basically a rocket launching platform during World War II, and it was basically tapped like a rocket launcher tacked onto the backs of like farm trucks.
Oh, okay.
With the bed taken off, and then the rocket launcher put on them. But they have like a very distinct sound that they made when they launched those rockets. And they're dumb rockets, so they're just like just straight up launching out there. But so I think like just tacking stuff onto random objects is very par for the course for the Soviet military.
No, it tracks. Yeah.
So. It tracks. It does track.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. So, but back over to Britain really quickly. So in the U.S., the Jeep, as we saw, it kind of replaced the motorcycle for like daily military stuff. Over in Britain, though, Norton was a very popular with the British people this time, both like the British Commonwealth and the military.
Okay.
So Norton's actually made up about like a quarter of all motorcycles in the armed forces.
That's insane.
Yeah. So they're very popular.
Yeah. Okay.
But the more popular still was Birmingham Small Arms. Their model was the M20. It was the most common motorcycle. I don't know if it was beloved or if it was just mass produced.
Yeah. Okay.
But we saw this kind of take a hit though when during a bombing run, the factory was taken out.
Oof.
So it kind of limited further production from them.
Yeah.
Triumph is still around; they're still making bikes as well. And then they also lost a factory. But we come back, we still, and again, one cool fact I always like to share is the Ace Cafe in London. The original building was hit by a bomb and later rebuilt. Yeah, so it was really cool to see all that cool stuff.
Yeah.
So,
speaking of like factories being bombed, the reason the Ural is called the Ural is because originally the factory where they were built, that M72 motorcycle was built, was in around the Moscow area, but the Soviets were worried that they would get bombed, so they moved it further east to the Ural Mountains.
Oh, okay.
So the factory got moved there, and then post-war and stuff, the name was changed to Ural Motorcycles.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. So, but yeah, during these bombings though, in England, dispatch riders were still being deployed, sending messages, during all this stuff, and can't imagine riding your motorcycle during a bombing run.
That'd be insane
in a city.
Yeah,
so it's just, dispatch riders don't get like the recognition, I don't think.
Yeah, it's definitely like, I feel like until now we haven't really mentioned too much about this through other history like episodes.
Well, not like, in any war movie I can think of that I see, like where like World War II, you might see like a dispatch rider or someone serving as that. It's like, but one, they're either in a Jeep
or they're like a horse, or like the bike is just, it's just like, it doesn't like, I don't know. It'd just be crazy to hear a story about like a dispatch rider. It'd be really cool, Yeah. So, funnily enough, I have one story. But yeah, so during the bombings of England, there were women riders back then. Women dispatch riders. No way.
Cool,
right? Women do ride motorcycles.
I know, right?
That's
what the
insane.
Hell? Yeah. But no, I read that and I was like, so why is motorcycling a male dominated thing? Like they were doing a lot cooler stuff from the start. So.
Something patriarchy, something.
Yeah, I guess
something.
But there's one story about a rider. Her name was Pamela McGeorge, and she was delivering a message during a bombing run. She was thrown from her bike from an explosion.
Damn.
So she was riding, and then she was thrown from an explosion. She had about half a mile left to go, I believe was the distance, as she said, and she ran the rest of the way there.
Holy shit.
And was managed to deliver her message.
That is amazing.
Yeah, it's nuts.
That is insane.
And then just a fun little fact for her, she was actually awarded the British Empire Medal for her heroism.
That is awesome.
That's crazy.
That's a pretty cool story.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's got to be like a ton of stories like this.
Yeah.
From at least related to motorcycles, but just in general.
Yeah. Well, and again, to like just kind of add to like how it just kind of made me think about like, like with motorcycling today being a male dominated thing. But by 1940, all dispatch riders of the Royal Navy were women.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's that is a very fun fact.
Yeah. So I don't know, women go ride, start riding more.
Yeah. Follow your history.
Yeah. Enjoy. Yeah. But, so yeah, I just wanted to kind of include that as a shout out.
Yeah.
That's an amazing feat for one, but then it involves a motorcycle.
Yeah.
Basically racing through the streets during a bombing.
And I get nervous at a sight of sheep.
Right. Yeah. So
I have a good reason.
Yeah.
But I'd rather be nervous around sheep than a bombed out.
Yep.
Or a bombing run.
Yeah. But and you mentioned like the half track motorcycle, the Kettencraft.
Kettencraft.
I don't know if that's even the right way to say it.
Probably.
But, yeah. But we had stuff like that. Moto Guzzi, like I was saying, they were making stuff as well. They had a motorcycle, but they also made this weird like little tuk-tuk thing.
Yeah.
And it was like a flatbed motorcycle basically, so they could mount.
Oh, okay.
So they could carry supplies. They were used to transport radio.
Interesting.
And you could even mount like small like mortars or like a cannon or like not a cannon, machine gun to it.
It's just the whole like World War II, World War I era, or I guess the mid 20th century.
Yeah.
It's so interesting because there was basically like a time of like, let's just put shit together and see how it works.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't, we'll move on. And if it does, great.
Perfect.
We'll keep designing it that way. Like everything
wild.
just felt so like tacked on and slapped together, which makes sense because everyone was trying to like pump out as many pieces of equipment as they want.
Yeah. No, it was just a very weird time.
Yeah.
It'd be cool to see one of those things, those little Moto Guzzi like trailer things. So,
but now we're moving on to
moving on from World War II. Well, one thing that I just thought it'd be cool just to mention really quick in between this time. So after which we've mentioned before. Yeah. After World War II, you have all these soldiers, and apparently some soldiers who are already bikers coming home. Yeah. And this is when we start to see like the motorcycle culture born too.
Yeah, I remember I think we covered that in one.
We did. And
one of our episodes.
And one thing I don't remember if we mentioned this or not, but the term chop shop or choppers, like motorcycle choppers, it was because like a bunch of these like now military surplus bikes are being sold really cheap. Pretty much everyone can get their hands on them. Okay. And they would do stuff. They would cut off like the rifle rack, and all these military parts.
And make it basically a civilian
they would
bike.
Call them a chopper.
Okay.
So I don't remember if we talked about that.
I don't think we ever did. No, that's really
I thought that was
I never knew that.
Yeah, I thought that was really cool.
That's awesome.
To see from there, and then even into like Korea, there was like Harley was still making like 70,000 bikes like in production for the military at that time.
That's insane.
Yeah, right. But then we move on into Vietnam, and then this is about the time that we start to see the use of motorcycles pretty much stop altogether, except for like, the only thing I could really find about Vietnam, for like your everyday soldier was that you'd see him as military police. So it'd be like just a patrol vehicle.
That makes sense.
But there was a cool thing that I did read about. So this is what we're seeing in the main force of military involvement now is just, it's a police vehicle or ride around base, whatever, But the Green Berets, or this time we're now a new unit. Yeah. And they would work along like the Ho Chi Minh Trail and all that stuff. And so they started to get bikes from like the locals. Okay. And they were using bikes on their part of their special military operations.
And I think we'll see more of that when we're talking about modern bikes. Is that they're used by like Navy SEALs and other special forces units to basically quickly get around.
Yeah. So no, it was really it's very insightful you say that because since Vietnam, all around the world, motorcycles are still used. By insurgency groups, like the rebel forces and stuff like that.
So you're basically saying they're right up there with the Toyota Hilux.
Yep, pretty much.
Sweet.
Yeah, in America, that's the closest we're going to get to a Hilux. So. We start to see a more specialized use of motorcycles, especially once like the global war on terror started. Yeah. Coalition forces, we arrive in Afghanistan and these giant trucks and Humvees and tanks they can't really chase bad guys across the terrain. Yeah. They're slow moving. The terrain's pretty difficult and they're so wide. I was even seeing pictures of like the Humvees that were flipped over on these narrow trails and stuff in the mountains. So some units started using motorcycles. They would either buy them from locals or if there were any surplus or I don't know, but they started doing this and they ran into a problem. Do you know what that problem was, Gleb?
I do not. Tell me, Mitch.
Fuel. Military vehicles
love diesel.
Mm-hmm. They use JP8.
Yep.
And motorcycles use
closer like
gas.
Jet fuel, right?
Yeah.
JP8, because that's the same thing that I think that powers the Abrams tank, and a bunch of other military vehicles.
Yeah. This is actually really funny. But the military basically, or the Marine Corps more precisely, they took a Kawasaki KLR. Yep. And it's like, hey, this bike works great. We need it to run on diesel. And then I think it was Hayes Technology, some company, but right. They found a way to put a diesel engine on a KLR. And that's basically what this is. It's the M1030 M1 is basically a military KLR.
You know what's funny? I actually saw one on KSL.
I know. Yeah, you did. Okay, you sent that to me.
For those of you that are not in Utah, KSL is our local like news website, and they have a classified section that's pretty much more popular here than like any other kind of classifieds.
Yeah.
But yeah, I saw one for sale on there. That would be
sweet.
Yeah, dude. If I had spare money, and a place
I would be interested.
I would be very interested in.
However, I did do like a little digging into this the M1030 M1. Yes, it is basically just a diesel powered KLR. But that diesel part makes up a big part of that definition. This motor, it's slower than the gasoline version of the KLR, and reliability. Like this engine was not built to like last on its own. It needs like a lot of work and stuff. So if you do go buy one, which you can as a civilian. But what I was reading is that trying to hunt down parts if something goes wrong with your motor.
That kind of makes sense because it's not a very wide available.
It's not
bike or engine at least. The bike is widely available, but not
the bike. Yeah. So you can get one.
But I did on the article that I read about, it was on military.com. I think they did mention that they did manage to get that thing up to 121 miles an hour at the Bonneville Salt Flats. But what was even more impressive is that it can go 400 miles, over 400 miles on a single tank of gas.
Yeah.
Because that thing just sipped
gas
because it's diesel, which I thought was kind of dope.
Yeah. And I did see on that too, like that range number is dependent on like what it's carrying and what the rider's carrying.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And the terrain.
Yeah.
So we'll get into that. But for listeners, if you haven't noticed, this has now gone from history into modern times.
Yeah. Which is still historical.
It is. No, and I mean everything that's happening today with this topic is because of stuff in the past, you know. Actually I think it was Al Qaeda, or I can't remember, it was some terrorist group. They dubbed Honda the insurgents' like favorite mechanized vehicle.
Such a great endorsement.
I can't remember. I don't think it was Al Qaeda directly.
But ISIS?
It might have been ISIS. But yeah, Hondas are like
the Taliban, maybe.
So
good job, Honda.
It's reliable. It's cheap.
It makes sense.
You know, they're peppy and quick.
Did you have another bike that you were going to go over? Because I want to talk about the Cristini AWD.
Go for that. Yeah, go for that. And then
So Cristini is a brand that I think we realized existed only a few episodes ago when we were doing the history of Ducati.
Yeah.
They are an Italian motorcycle manufacturer, and they primarily make like a lot of kind of like dual sport and more off-roady bikes. But they have a motorcycle that is actually an all-wheel drive motorcycle. So the front wheel drive also gets power. And so both the front and the back wheel are powered, and it's a very interesting system. It uses basically like a few extra clutch packs. So once the rear tire starts to brake, or the rear wheel starts to break traction, the front one kicks in.
Interesting.
Which is very interesting, but it has been a vehicle of choice for Navy SEALs and other American Special Forces groups, mainly because of that feature. It's able to get through a lot rougher terrain than a regular like motorcycle would be, just a single wheel drive, rear wheel drive motorcycle. It is powered by a liquid cooled 400cc 4-stroke engine, and this is how it gets power to the front wheel. So it basically has another chain that runs from the counter shaft to the top of the bike. So it has like a second shaft at the top. So one powers the rear wheel, and then another chain goes to the top where there's a drive shaft that goes to the front fork, basically below the fuel tank. And in that front fork, like where the forks are connected to it, there is another mechanism that's also driven by a chain, like two chains for each fork. And there's two more shafts, or one per fork, that go down to their own patented front, like was it axle?
This sounds so complicated.
It's very complicated.
Wow.
So front hub, sorry. So the power from that is sent down these like two more shafts to a specialized front hub that has 2 clutches in it to allow the wheel to like spin when it's not getting power without making everything else move.
Yeah.
But those 2 shafts that go, they use a ball spline system, which I have no idea what that means. I'm not an engineer, but it still allows the bike to have its full 12 inches of suspension travel while still providing power to the front wheel.
That's wild.
So whatever magic they're using in there, I mean, and I was surprised that it's all mechanical. I thought that maybe like, oh, like does it have like a little maybe electric motor or something?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Like power like an electric motor.
Yeah, but no, it's all mechanical. It's still powered by the engine. It's just used like basically like chain shaft, like
weird
chain shaft, more chains, 2 shafts, lots of shafts.
Interesting.
Going around here.
I want to ride one.
Dude, that's the first thing I was thinking
that's gotta
about.
Feel
like,
weird.
I'm like, I would love to ride that one because I'm like a front or an all-wheel drive motorcycle.
Yeah,
it just sounds bizarre.
Yeah. It's nuts, man.
Sorry,
I'll let you finish.
Like, oh no, I was just gonna say like, I didn't even know this was a thing, but apparently the technology is there, but it seems insanely complicated. Maybe it's actually not. Who knows? It just sounds complicated on paper, but it is all mechanical.
Yeah.
And even like it doesn't use any kind of electronic to like kick in the front wheel drive. It's when the rear wheel breaks traction. It like
that's insane.
Because of the clutch packs that it has. It like pushes more like some power to the front. So it's still a mechanical system.
Yeah,
but
comes a long way from the Model H.
I know, right? It's pretty crazy. I would love to ride one, but like it's crazy to think about that the front wheel can also be powered mechanically versus like an electric motor.
Yeah. So that bike, the Christiani, I think that one is being used.
Yeah, it is currently being used.
And I can't remember if the M1030 still is or not. I think it's being phased out or has been. I don't know. But these bikes, though, they in modern times they're used, like you said, by Navy SEALs. They're used by the U.S. Army's 75th Ranger Regiment, and the Marine Recon and MARSOC also use them for their reconnaissance type missions and stuff.
Very cool.
But still moving on into also still modern times.
Yeah.
Glad there's a war in Ukraine.
Yep, there is a war in Ukraine. Thanks to their asshole neighbor next door.
Yeah, exactly. But what we're seeing is that these Ukrainian soldiers, they're also now using motorcycles to fight the Russians. And what they're doing is they're actually using Zero's MMX electric bike.
I did see something about that, and it makes sense. While I'm sure range is not the best on those, as we've seen with other electric motorcycles, but the fact that they're quiet and silent, it makes a lot of sense that they would be.
And you don't,
great for just in and out.
Well, yeah, I think if you're working in like within like an outpost or something, or like you have like a point of operation going on that you can zip out, cause trouble, and come back
and
charge
it up.
You know,
I could especially see it being like very useful. I don't know if these specific bikes have just like a swappable battery, like some of the manufacturers like trying to like experiment with, basically.
Yeah,
which would make even more sense that instead of charging it up, you just pop in the new battery and then get it going again.
Yeah, and there's actually I'll get to that in a minute actually. But these bikes have been super useful because they're quiet, they're small. A small team can carry in like it says here on here they can carry in like anti-tank equipment, take out a tank, and zip out of there.
That's pretty sweet.
And you wouldn't even hear them, you know.
Yeah.
So they're still continuing to be used in a pretty like conventional / non-conventional way.
Yeah.
You know? And then to go off of that, with everything that's going on in the Pacific right now, I got tension with China and everything going on. The U.S. military is currently testing like new tactics and a new bike, to kind of play into like this recon quick strike vehicle.
Okay.
And the Marines are actually even testing out now like a new team called like a mobility team. And so it's like you have some vehicles and they pack these bikes with them, and they'll break off from like the main force, and then they'll deploy the bike. They'll stash the big vehicles, deploy the bikes, and then 2-man teams can go out and scout and then come back and report.
That's very interesting.
But this bike they're doing it on, It's a new electric bike. I think they're calling it the Stealth Hawk.
Okay.
Yeah, all electric, swappable battery, decent range, but they're, in testing, they have to figure these things out with every electric bike. There's reliability, the fuel, electricity is your fuel.
Yeah.
So you need to be able to do that. But I think the reason they're really going into this is because of these Pacific Islands are so dense and thick that drones won't be able to see anything underneath the trees.
That makes sense.
And so if they can have like a quick deployment, like single track type bike, they can get around quickly. So yeah.
It makes sense because, the bike is just so nimble. You can get it through a lot of places where you can't get something like a big vehicle.
And these things are light too.
Yeah.
So,
and I was going to say, like, especially like, I'm assuming they're kind of like an electric dirt bike, basically.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
We packed in easy, like if it falls or drops, one guy can pick it up without trouble. So it makes a lot of sense. I'm curious to see how like motorcycle in general is going to evolve here in the future, but especially if with these electric bikes, if we start seeing them more use out of them in the military.
Yeah. So yeah.
I think that's it.
Yeah. I felt like that was like a lot of information just to give everybody, but again, I didn't want this to be longer than it already was going to be.
And it's still pretty long.
It's still pretty long. But where I got a lot of this information, there's actually a really cool video on YouTube. It's a channel called The History Guy, and covers a lot of the stuff that I brought up. And I found this video just by trying to research stuff, and I decided to watch it, and it was, it's a good video. Go check it out. The Motorcycle Guy, like just motorcycles and warfare.
Awesome.
Yeah, it was really cool. So
sweet. Well, guys, thank you so much for listening to our very last episode of the year. Hope you guys had a great year of riding, and hopefully your next year is off to a great start.
Yeah.
We will see you probably in a couple of weeks here.
We hope to, we hope you come back next year.
Yeah. Keep listening to us. We're going to take a little break, for the holidays or after the holidays, and,
recharge.
We'll see you guys soon. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.